Hi, I'm Robert Tolby, and today I'm talking about why we think eating bland and disgusting food is good for you. I'm sure many of you believe that nutritional science is totally objective and that what we consider to be healthy food is backed by decades of research. And that belief is not entirely false. Eating oatmeal for breakfast is probably healthier than eating an apple fritter. But who says that foods like oatmeal are good for you? And why? In America, a third of our early experiences with food comes from eating school lunch. When I was little, we had plenty of yummy, delicious, sugary things to choose from. My favorite cafeteria food was those French toast sticks. My God, they were amazing. But in 2010, Michelle Obama happened. Her Let's Move campaign sought to obliterate childhood obesity by revamping school lunches across the country. And just like that, the French toast sticks and strawberry milk disappeared. Thanks, Obama. But to be fair to Mrs. Obama, school lunch really needed an overhaul. Students in especially underserved areas were not being adequately fed. While Michelle Obama was the face of the movement and was lambasted by the public for ruining school lunch, the program was voluntary and merely rewarded schools for making positive changes to their lunch offerings. The U.S. Department of Agriculture, or USDA, was actually calling the shots. You see, in America, the agency that decides what we should be eating is not a health agency. It's an agency in charge of regulating food production. While you hope they care about your health, their primary goal is to keep the companies selling us food happy. So asking them what you should be eating is like asking your barber if you need a haircut. There's definitely a conflict of interest involved. But anyways, the reason I bring this up is that the USDA, through their outreach programs, has had a tremendous impact on influencing what we Americans think is healthy today. Remember the food pyramid posters that were all over your school cafeteria? That's right. That's the USDA at work again. According to the original pyramid unveiled in the early 90s, we're supposed to be eating stuff that looks like this. Bland, unseasoned food in various shades of beige. These images have been burned into our minds, but food doesn't have to be unseasoned and disgusting. It can be delicious, seasoned, and flavorful, just like the food I received from HelloFresh, today's sponsor. When my premium supporters on Patreon voted for this video topic, I thought it was hilarious because I knew HelloFresh would be sponsoring my next video. Anyways, if you've never heard of HelloFresh, they're a meal kit company that sends you all the stuff you need to make a fabulous meal at home. Their food tastes absolutely amazing. Their chefs really know what they're working with, which is fresh, seasonal ingredients. There's a bunch of really yummy meals in the spring, such as one-pot creamy lemon dill chicken soup and garden spinach ricotta ravioli. They sent me a box with 3 meals, each one serving 2 people, although if you need to serve more people, it's super easy to customize your plan. I have a fear of the grocery store, so it's really nice to have a box filled with basically everything you need to make a meal show up on your doorstep. My favorite meal was the balsamic tomato and herb chicken. It was incredible. And here it is. We're gonna try it. That's actually really good. And it was also easy to make. All the ingredients are pre-portioned, which saves a lot of prep time, and the directions are very clear and simple to follow. This means you'll waste a lot less food. We've all had that moment where we buy an entire package of tomatoes from the grocery store, for example, and only use one before the rest of the tomatoes go bad. With HelloFresh, if a recipe calls for 1 tomato, they send only 1 tomato. Also, if you're vegetarian, pescatarian, or have other dietary requirements, HelloFresh has you covered and you can totally tailor your box to fit your needs. And because you're a loyal Robert Tolby viewer, you get a deal. Go to HelloFresh.com and use code TOLPY16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 surprise gifts. Anyways, where was I? Oh, yes. Why do we think food that is healthy looks like this? That's right, we have a young man on TikTok eating the most bland looking meal I have ever seen in my entire life. Of course, TikTok mercilessly mocked him for eating this. There were countless duets of people throwing seasonings on the table and jokes being cracked about the habits of white people. But in all seriousness, let's unpack this TikTok. There are a lot of issues here, with the most obvious issue being what he is eating. Completely unseasoned chicken and rice. Nutritionally, I don't have much qualms about it. Chicken and rice are not bad for you in the sense that chicken is a filling lean protein, and rice provides plenty of carbs and fiber and such. But despite that, this food is incredibly unhealthy to eat. Why? Because it's psychological torture to eat it. In my unprofessional opinion as a layperson, I think eating a donut or even 2 donuts is less detrimental to your overall well-being than eating what is on his plate. The fact is, food that makes you happy is healthy food, psychologically speaking, and eating it can be just as conducive to happiness as eating your fruits and veggies. One study conducted by German researchers used smartphones to track people's eating habits and discovered that eating sweets yielded a comparable amount of happiness to eating healthy foods. And we're talking about comparing sweets to tasty veggies and such here. Imagine comparing the psychological effects of eating what appears to be a fillet of blobfish to eating a donut. Without conducting a proper study, I'd hypothesize that the donut would yield more happiness than the blobfish. But aren't donuts bad for you? Well, let's just say if you ate 2 dozen donuts a day and nothing else, you'd probably have your own TLC show by the end of the year. But if you ate 2 donuts a day as part of a fairly balanced diet, you'd maybe put on a few pounds, but you certainly wouldn't be grossly unhealthy. All people worry about is that number on the scale and another number called BMI. But those numbers matter far less than you might think. Obviously, if you're super morbidly obese, you're probably not healthy. Your mobility may be limited. Your internal organs are surrounded with fat. Your weight puts tremendous strain on your heart, etc., etc. Those are issues caused by being fat itself. But what about the issues faced by people who are just a little overweight? The reality is many people whose BMIs are just a little outside the healthy range don't really face many adverse health effects. I learned that when I saw a registered dietitian recently because I was concerned about how fast I was gaining weight. This fact was one of the first things that came out of her mouth. Apparently, BMI was popularized by actuaries at insurance companies to measure the overall health of groups of people, not individuals. So using it to measure individual health when someone's just a little bit over or under the normal range is kind of stupid, to be honest. From what I've read and learned from people who know way more about this than I do, overweightness and unhealthiness are just strongly correlated with each other. There isn't always a direct causal relationship. Back to the example of eating 2 dozen donuts a day. If your cholesterol and A1C or whatever are out of whack after eating 2 dozen donuts a day for a month, it's probably not because of the weight you gained, which in my rough estimate would be around 20 to 30 pounds if you go by the calories. While gaining that much fat isn't necessarily good for you, I sincerely doubt the fat itself is what's causing your poor blood work results. There's probably another cause, which is, I don't know, maybe the fact that you're eating 2 dozen donuts a day. That's horrible for you. The sugar alone is going to give you diabetes. What I'm trying to say is that you can be in reasonable good health and be overweight. The whole health thing is kind of a tangent, though. This video is captioned, "Eating chicken and rice to stay lean, not healthy." This creator's concern is not with his health, but with his physique. Being lean and being healthy are not the same thing. In fact, if you're 3% body fat, you're probably on death's doorstep, to be frank. But why the hell would you want to be lean when you could just eat donuts instead? What motivates that desire? I don't want to call anyone who wants to be slender or muscular fatphobic, but oftentimes if you want to be slim, your motivations might be rooted in fat phobia, and that doesn't make you a good or bad person. It just means you should think about why you want to be thin. I'm also reluctant to point the finger at anyone who wants to lose weight and go, "You see, those are the bad people who hate the fat people," because that would be hypocritical. No one is exempt from being fatphobic. When I first stepped foot in my dietitian's office, I had concerns about my appetite and weight gain. I'm prescribed a lot of medications that can really mess up my metabolism and overall physical health. But can I really say there isn't a portion of me somewhere that wants to not gain weight out of pure vanity? I hope I've made my point, which is that fat phobia impacts everyone's thinking, even yours. But where does fat phobia come from? I read a fascinating book by Dr. Sabrina titled "Fearing the Black Body: The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia," which I will be reflecting on in further detail for all access patrons and above. In it, Strings tracks our modern Western hatred of fatness all the way back to the literal Renaissance. And what she found is that hating fatness is an intersection of rich white folks fearing the racial other and despising the lower class. During the Italian Renaissance, many painters in rural areas didn't meet many black people. They were removed from the slave trade, which meant they knew of black people and thought they were lesser than white people, but not necessarily in beauty. Women were most commonly painted by male Renaissance painters, and a lot of treatises were written about their beauty. Much of the writings idolized the svelte Venus, but at the time, Venus was permitted to be outright fat and still be equally as beautiful. There are a handful of historical examples of depictions of black women representing the beauty of Venus, although black women at the time were depicted with similar facial features to white women except with dark skin, because many artists never had a black person sit for them. Moving on to the Baroque period, we see a ton more pictures of beautiful fat women. The most famous painter of fat women, Peter Paul Rubens, has a name that is synonymous with being a plump, shapely woman, i.e. being Rubenesque. Clearly, fat phobia didn't exist at the time, right? Wrong, if you were a man at least. Men who were fat were considered lazy, dim-witted, you name it. In fact, Rubens's personal writings revealed that he had his own problems with his weight, much to his dismay. Fat women were simply considered beautiful because their proportions made them desirable to men at the time. Fast forward to the 19th century, however, when slavery was in full swing and fully racialized, fat black women were no longer seen as beautiful Renaissance Venuses, but as grotesque freak show attractions. Just Google the story of Sarah Bartman and be appalled. Being thin soon became a way to separate oneself from being a fat racial other. We see this most clearly in women's magazines of the time. If you were a good Anglo-Saxon housewife, the best way to separate yourself from the Irish, for example, was to be thin. Thereby, you could physically differentiate yourself from people who were considered to be fat, impoverished, and racially inferior. The concept of whiteness continued to adapt to include more groups of people, but the practice of the white upper classes distinguishing themselves from anyone who wasn't white and rich by being thin continued on to this day, and along the way, it was justified by modern medicine. The medical discoveries that indicate that being overweight is bad for your health were made after people already hated fatness. That was a very brief summary and simplified things to an extent where I hope I'm not misrepresenting the conclusion of Strings' fantastic research. If you have the time, totally read the book. It's even on Audible, just a credit away. But what does this all mean? If fears of being a little fat are overblown, should we just eat donuts and that's it? Well, not in donuts alone doth man live. This doesn't mean we need to throw out all of nutritional science out the window. You should probably eat your fruits and veggies, but whatever you do, you shouldn't be eating this. That's a terrible idea. In my mind, a balanced diet takes a lot of things into consideration. And the first thing it should take into consideration is your mental needs. And you need some joy and seasoning in your life. This is what is lacking in 99% of all fad diets, such as the Mediterranean diet, keto, paleo, etc. Why is that the case? It's not as if seasoning is loaded with calories. It's basically leaves 90% of the time. It's not going to kill you. Not to play into stereotypes too much, but from what I've noticed, the majority of people eating these diets are white people. Don't get me wrong, there are plenty of white people who can cook and make delicious seasoned food, but a lot of white people, my family included, is there a reason for this? I'm not an expert in seasoning and food, but I found a paper specifically about the Mediterranean diet. The author, Kate Gardner-Burt, argues that it is very explicitly a white diet invented by white people for other white people and legitimized by white nutritional scientists. It isn't even representative of the diverse diets of the region it's named after. The problem with diets like the Mediterranean diet is not that they are bad for you. They aren't really. It's that they are considered to be the only kind of diet that is good for you. There are limitless diets that are good for you. You just have to look outside the bubble of a white-dominant society. A family friend of mine is Gujarati, and she taught my sister and I how to cook fabulous Indian food with mountains of spices in it. And most of it is insanely healthy for you. It's all vegetarian, and there's lots of beans, lots of rice, and it's all delicious. So when food like that exists, why the hell are people eating this? It's because that's what we're told to eat. We are prescribed a diet by the environment we live in, and we can't see outside of it. And that harms everyone, especially people of color who have to deal with their food being mocked, demonized, and called unhealthy simply because it has spices in it. I made this video because of a TikTok I saw pointing this problem out. I unfortunately couldn't find the original video, but I feel it's important to say something about this problem. While I encourage you to try new foods and not torture yourself, it's hard to say whether that will make much change overall, as this issue is systemic. I hope that I've enlightened you enough to at least start on the pathway to making a real positive change and eating in a way that has a positive impact on both your mental health and your physical health. Anyways, I'm Robert Tolpe, and if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe, and maybe even check out my Patreon. If I get 5 more patrons, maybe I can afford an air conditioner. And I hope you have a good week. Bye-bye.